Thank you very much for your focus and attention this evening, June the 14th, 2019, at approximately 6 p.m. I have come to update the country and our viewership and all of those looking on the closeout of the Venezuelan registration process of Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago. As you all are aware, approximately 9 weeks ago, the Cabinet took a decision to have a 2-week registration process of all Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago, commencing that process on the 31st of May and completing it today, Friday, the 14th of June, with 1 day off in between working weekends. That 1 day off was in celebration and out of respect to the public holiday of Eid and the celebration of Eid by our Muslim brothers and sisters. Viewers, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, members of the media, and all looking on, I have a great sense of pride and thankfulness this afternoon to be able to address you and to say that we have completed the registration process. As we had said we would, we stuck to it, and we closed the registration process today at 5 p.m. I am also happy to say that there were absolutely no incidents, no injuries to anyone during the 2-week process. Yes, there may have been some persons. I remember when I was in San Fernando visiting this week, there was a young boy who suffered from epilepsy that had an episode, but there were no significant injuries, certainly no outbreaks or anything like that during this 2-week registration process, which is a tremendous achievement. Before I get into the specifics of what happened and what we've done, I would like to take this opportunity to thank a number of people, because I think that is extremely important for the success of this registration exercise, despite all of the naysayers. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Prime Minister for his support, guidance, and policy decision-making discussions before, because despite what people say, this has been in the pipeline for some time. We announced it, as I said, post-Cabinet about 9 weeks ago. So I thank the Honourable Prime Minister for the important role that he played and for his support throughout. I then would like to take the opportunity to thank my Cabinet colleagues again for their support throughout this process. And I'd like to single out, in particular, Minister Hines, who, as you all are all aware, held on for me. He held on the fort at the outset and start of this registration process when I was away on official business on a prime ministerial delegation. I'd then like to thank the permanent secretaries, deputy permanent secretary at the Ministry of National Security. I'd like to thank all of the staff at the Ministry of National Security who played important roles in the preparation, implementation, and carrying out of this registration process. The Ministry of Communication for the support role that they played throughout as well. I'd like to thank, this is the Acting Chief Immigration Officer, Charmaine Gandhi Andrews, and her staff for the tremendous role. Immigration made me tremendously proud throughout this whole process for the role that they played. We had some hairy times in the planning and in the implementation, but they did a wonderful and remarkable job that Trinidad and Tobago can be proud about. I'd like to thank Acting Chief of Defence Staff, Captain Archer, for the role that the Defence Force played throughout this exercise. Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith, and the leadership role that he played and in getting the men and women in Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to provide the level of support that they did. The fire services, all of the volunteers, the medical officers from the Ministry of Health, those from Children's Authority, and everyone who played a role. I hope I haven't left out anyone who played a role in this important and historic process in the registration of Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago. At 5 p.m. today, we close the doors. Any persons who are still outside of these registration centers, I am told, are actually persons who have gone through the registration process already and are waiting on family and friends who are inside now. The gates are closed. There are no persons legitimately outside who are claiming they did not get an opportunity to register. The significance of that is it shows the success of this registration process and the accuracy of it. As the Prime Minister announced this morning in Parliament, we were just a few short of 14,000 as a 8:47 p.m. last night. During the course of today, we crossed the 15,000 mark. I will provide the exact number of persons registered in this process once we have compiled the information, and we will also provide the breakdowns as to how many men, women, children. This registration process that was a well thought out and implemented process that is now a success also allowed us the opportunity to gather intelligence. Part of our registration process was that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service was able to interrogate and to interview persons, and we were able to derive information such as when did you get here, on what vessel did you get here, and as you all are aware, we registered persons whether they came in legally or illegally. So we gathered a good amount of information and intelligence that we will now be pursuing during this process. I would also like to denounce and also to all of those criticisms and the misinformation and the attempts to mislead the public of Trinidad and Tobago, and in fact the world at large, about our border situation and whether we were able to secure our borders or not. As I said throughout this process, and as I was just reminded, even before announcing this registration process, in February of this year, we launched a special operation on our borders, on our land borders. And that special operation was helping us to assist in picking up persons who were entering illegally. Shortly thereafter, we utilized all of the available marine assets of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard in protecting our borders. So despite the suggestions being made, and the most irresponsible suggestion of the leader of the opposition today upon entering Parliament and saying that our coastlines are being invaded, completely untrue and false. In fact, over the past couple of weeks, and this week in particular, our Coast Guard men and women out on our seas have done a magnificent job. We have had incidents, I will declare it now, where we have been turning back vessels out in the ocean. Some of the vessels then started to pretend that there were persons who were sick on board. We would turn them back and say, well, go back to Venezuela and seek medical attention. You're not coming into Trinidad and Tobago. And the Coast Guard men and women report that as the vessel drove back towards Venezuela, sailed back towards Venezuela, you then see the person miraculously get up, the person who was having a heart attack or in some discomfort, and resume as normal. We have also had an incident when we've stopped one of these vessels coming across, of them suddenly springing a leak, and the vessel began to take on water, and that particular operation had to then become a search and rescue operation. I would like to thank the men and women of the Coast Guard who, despite all of the misinformation aimed at them and the criticism that they were not closing down our borders, did an excellent job with the limited assets they have. We utilize all of the technology available. I was being told that there's certain experts out there that were saying our radar system is not working. Again, completely untrue. We are in the process of upgrading our radar system, but it continued to work, and it played a very important and essential role over the last 5 months in us planning operations, because we were able to see the type of path that vessels were taking, and we were able to then put our limited assets to work based on intelligence. The men and women in the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force and our police service worked together on our land borders in terms of detaining persons who entered illegally. Immigration officers at the Immigration Detention Center did an excellent job. What we faced Trinidad and Tobago was a worsening situation in Venezuela. And despite all of the persons saying that we refused to accept that there was a crisis, that is untrue. Over 2 years ago, we had a figure bandied about by the UNHCR of 40,000 Venezuelans being in Trinidad and Tobago. You've just heard me say that today, after a registration process, where at the end of a 2-week registration process, there were no lines outside. There were no chaotic crowds of persons still trying to get registered outside. Despite all the negative and all of the attempts by those who wanted to raise issues, that did not happen. What that shows is that the number we will come up with at the end of this registration process is an accurate reflection of those who are here. If persons are in Trinidad and they refuse to accept the opportunity to register in the 2 weeks, they will become now subject to the laws of Trinidad and Tobago and the enforcement of our immigration laws. But the point being that if we just cross 15,000 today, we are nowhere near the 40,000 mark of 2 years ago, where situation has worsened in Venezuela, and we have had more Venezuelans making their way to Trinidad and Tobago. I am also announcing here this afternoon that I have signed today as the Minister of National Security an order that from Monday morning, we are implementing visas and the requirement of visas for Venezuelans to enter Trinidad and Tobago legally. These visas will be issued out of Port of Spain via an application process to take place at our functioning embassy in Caracas. Again, more misinformation that was peddled is that the embassy, Trinidad and Tobago's embassy in Caracas, was closed down. Completely untrue. So I'm pleased to tell the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago throughout, the government has said that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are our first priority. As the next step, now that the registration process has ended, we are implementing immediately a visa policy, and the only Venezuelans who would be allowed to enter our ports of entry, our legal ports of entry, legally, are those to whom we issue visas. Venezuelans who have not registered in this process will now be subject to the laws, as we said throughout the process. We gave sufficient warnings prior to this process, and you will now be subject to our immigration laws of Trinidad and Tobago. The government took a decision to provide a humanitarian service in allowing registered Venezuelans to work here for a year. As I announced at the outset of this policy, there is no guarantee of education for those Venezuelans, even when you're registered in Trinidad and Tobago. Our first priority is educating the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. With respect to medical health care, the Venezuelans, like all visitors in Trinidad and Tobago, are permitted primary health care, which is emergency health care services. Anything above that, they will have to pay. The other issues are issues of security. It is being bandied about that there is a sudden increase and uptick, and also a number of Venezuelan criminals who are here in Trinidad and Tobago. Whilst there has been some level of criminal element in Trinidad and Tobago from Venezuela, it is not by any means at a maximum level, and the vast majority of Venezuelans who are here engaged in that type of activity. But what we were able to gather through the registration process is intelligence to be able to help us to deal more accurately and more efficiently with the criminal element that is here in Trinidad and Tobago. So what I'm happy to announce is that the registration process has been a success. A few days ago, we took the decision to begin implementing a CHIT system, basically, a ticket system, to get the crowds off of the streets outside of Tobago, Port of Spain, and San Fernando registration centers. That was a test case for today, and it worked very well. So persons, when we knew the numbers we could process on a daily basis, we would come outside, photograph, give out unique chits and identifications with numbers, a unique stamped feature, as well as their names, etc. So they would come the next day. That process, thankfully, is now over. A short while ago, I released photographs of outside the Oval at 4:30 this afternoon, and the great sense of relief that we were able to see that the process had gone very well and had gone without any incidents, especially today, where a lot of people were hoping for and willing that there would be chaos outside of these registration centers. There were even some unfortunate politicians and those who have entered the political arena who were suggesting that there was chaos in San Fernando. Again, not true. I got a briefing just before coming to this that the persons who are currently outside of the tent in San Fernando have already been registered, and they're waiting on their families and friends. We have within the gates at the shut-off of 5 p.m. this afternoon in the San Fernando all of the persons who are to be registered. I'd like to thank the immigration officers, defense force officers, the police officers who have taken a decision to continue working throughout the night to complete the registration process, as opposed to us continuing throughout the weekend, which are contingency plans that we made. So despite all of the requests for necessity to increase the registration, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has stuck to its word, has stuck to its policy, and I'm happy to announce that the registration process has been completed. I would like to make another point. We are very aware that there are those outside of Trinidad and Tobago and certain bodies outside of Trinidad and Tobago who have been trying to push their agenda via the media and via other means to put pressure on the government of Trinidad and Tobago. This government has always been resolved and steadfast in that we will do what is right for Trinidad and Tobago. And some of these international bodies that do nothing to assist these types of situations but sit in some far-off country pontificating and trying to influence the lives of our citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, the answer is a resolute no. This government will do what is best for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have completed a registration exercise which allows us now to have proper information as to the numbers that are here, who is here, who will be permitted to stay here, how they got here, and a number of other incidents. I would also like to at this stage tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago, from a law enforcement point of view, we intend and we have been gathering intelligence to now launch a number of law enforcement exercises aimed at those who are engaged in illegal activity, including human trafficking, those who are trying to enslave persons in prostitution and other means like this. We have been gathering the information and we will be pursuing the enforcement of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. So ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, it is indeed the government's pleasure to announce that the process has gone well and it has shown itself to be a success. As soon as the figures are compiled as to those who are registered, we will provide it. We will also provide, as I said at the outset, the cost of the registration process. I did not want to get into an exercise of saying one cost and it increased over the period of time. So now that the registration process is coming to a close and to an end, I have asked those in charge of the various levels, the Ministry of National Security and other levels that have incurred costs to start compiling the final figures so we can tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago what this exercise has cost us, this worthwhile exercise. We'll also begin the distribution of the registration cards. I remember the outset of this process, someone breaching confidentiality and security and circulating, fortunately, was only a mock-up of how a card may have looked. That is not how the card is going to look. The final card was kept very, very close, the Chief Immigration Officer, myself, and a few others, and very soon those cards will be distributed to all who have registered. It has been a great logistical exercise and a great success. And I thank the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, by and large, the civic-minded and right-thinking citizens, for bearing with us as we carried out this exercise, and I assure you we will continue to do what is right for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We had a very unfortunate incident taking place last night outside one of the registration centres at the Queen's Park Oval. There is no doubt in the government's mind that those who stirred up that protest, as they call it, an illegal protest according to the Commissioner of Police, were paid so to do. We have no qualms whatsoever in saying that. They also, some of them found themselves out of the parliament, and it was quite amusing because when I left the parliament at lunchtime today to do some quick errands and came back in, when I left and they were shouting their chants, they had no signs. When I left the parliament a short while ago to come here to meet with you, the members of the media, they had perfectly printed signs with a lot of anti-government and anti-PNM slogans. That is all orchestrated. And I'll leave it at that. You, the citizens, can read in between the lines and understand. The same thing this morning in answering questions in the parliament. There has been a lot of attack on the Venezuelan registration process. And they must be so depressed now that what they hoped to fail did not fail. And it will not fail. I end on a note of caution. The opposition is hell-bent on creating xenophobia in Trinidad and Tobago. We, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, must not allow them to do that. A lot of what is being circulated by the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago in the most irresponsible manner, and those associated by the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago, is being done to create xenophobia. Please, Trinidad and Tobago, here where every creed and race finds an equal place, let us stay true to our values. And I end by thanking everyone who has been involved in this process, including you, the members of the media, who throughout the whole process, at every minute of the day, reported on the process, sometimes from your own lens and perspective. But you gave the public a view of what was taking place. And today we can tell the public and the world, and in particular those outside who wanted it to fail, those outside who wanted to unduly influence the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that we have completed this historic exercise. Thank you very much. Take some questions.
Minister, could you give us elaborate a little bit more about the visa policy that you mentioned? Now, is there a cap on the number of visas that will be issued, and is there, do we have sufficient safeguards in place to make sure that whichever the Venezuelan national gets these visas, when they do come over here, that they don't suddenly drop off the radar and then you can't find them, and then then we just add more. We had a bigger problem.
Remember, prior to this point and prior to Monday, Venezuelans were allowed to enter Trinidad and Tobago and stay here for a 90-day period before they had to return. So the visa policy now allows us to ask persons, rather when they can no longer just walk into our legal ports of entry and gain access to Trinidad and Tobago. And we are going to have a policy in place as to who visas will be granted to or not be granted to. So of course it allows us a filtering and a screening process to be utilized. A visa policy is not something that is by any means abnormal. Right now we have visa policies for other countries in the world, and their entrance into Trinidad and Tobago. We ourselves as Trinidad and Tobagonians are subject to visas elsewhere, and it will be the enforcement of those visas. You overstay your visa, we pick you up, we're going to take you to the immigration detention center, and we are going to deport you. The work has begun at the work is about to begin at the Eastern Correctional Facility for us to increase the size of our IDC, our immigration detention center capacity. So that work is expected to begin very, very shortly. We've done the procurement processes, and we just want to get on with the work. So we have an increased capacity. So persons who are here illegally, we will pick you up, we will take you there, and we will deport you.
Okay. I just wanted to, so as of now, at all three centers, what you're saying is that everybody there's nobody outside who has not been registered. Everybody has either been registered and left, or whoever is still there is still inside.
So we cut it off at 5 p.m. At 5 p.m. we were able to have everybody inside the centers or inside areas that we were able to ring fence, and we're going to complete their registration.
Minister, do you have an estimate on the number of people who are ring fenced today and would have also gotten chits to return?
Well, there's no returning. We had prepared a system, so this morning when I announced a system that you'd be given a chit and asked to return, that was of course trying to presuppose and trying to predict that there would be massive crowds or numbers turning up. That did not happen. So we are going to be able to complete. So contingency we put in place is if we could not register everyone, meaning take them straight through the process tonight, they would have been given a chit and asked to return tomorrow. That did not fortunately have to be implemented. We will be able to complete everyone tonight. We'll just keep going until we complete them.
And no estimate on the numbers inside waiting to be processed?
I have that, but I prefer to give you all the numbers at the final figures.
I just want to go back to the decision to implement the visa. What types of visas are being contemplated, in as much as there are people who simply come to Cedrus to buy goods and take it back, so that's a day trip? Is that something that is going to now be stifled and stymied by this visa policy?
We will make the necessary announcements. So for example, this afternoon I informed the government of Venezuela that we've taken this decision that will now go through the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, and we will then announce in short order this is the policy that is going to be applicable, because exactly what you've just raised are some of the things that we need to think through.
I noticed in your phrasing you spoke about that the people who did not register will be subject to immigration laws. How has the government contemplated proceeding on deportations?
Again, I don't want to speak. You all would realize by now I try not to speak prematurely, and I try not to speak before time. We have been planning. I'll just put it that way. The same way we had planned these exercises and this registration process, we have been in a process of planning. What I've asked is that there be set up a multi-agency task force, so similar to like what you see in the United States, an ICE group, We're going to set up a multi-agency task force, and they will be mandated to deal with this type of situation, aimed and geared towards either removal or deportation.
And any particular sensitivities being factored into that ICE-like approach or unit, considering, for example, as you mentioned ICE, we've seen issues with the way that children are treated as they wait for some kind of settlement of their status.
This government has shown that it's very humanitarian. This government has shown, for example, earlier this week when I found myself at the Oval and it was meant to just be a pass-through and saw massive crowds outside, and there's been some level of criticism of the level of leadership that I took in taking control of that situation. I'll tell the public what happened. When I turned up there were massive crowds and persons were not conforming with the line. And what you had is a number of women and children, small children, being pressed aside the barrier. So all I did was really open it up for us to allow the women and children in. As soon as that happened, everyone got back into line, and that was the end of it. We will continue to have that type of compassion and empathy in dealing with persons. So this is not going to be a swooping down and carting children off in droves. Absolutely not.
Minister,
Just give me 1 second. As I use the word droves, it reminds me just to make the point. During the course of this week, we had a counselor, a UNC counselor in Cedrus, and then, as I said, today you had the leader of the opposition using the irresponsible language of an invasion taking place. I thank the men and women in Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and our Defence Force, our Coast Guard, for ensuring that that is misinformation and that is an untruth. There were no droves, there was no invasion taking place. But what the population should note is that is what the opposition wanted. Throughout this exercise, all they have done is criticize, and when their criticisms weren't coming to pass, they began to invent false facts, invent things that aren't true, and to propagate and promulgate those types of information that are untrue. That did not happen.
Minister, we have reporters right now in Scarborough and Tobago, and they've been messaging me, and they said in the case of San Fernando, where there are still a few hundred people outside of the gate, an official came out and told the Venezuelans that they would need to go to immigration with their documents and that no more registrations or nothing else would be done today. And she actually just recorded that. So what was the instruction? Can you tell us what the instruction was to centers that still had people outside at this time? Because the situation in Tobago, they moved them to Port Mall, and a lot of them are just upstairs in this area waiting on information similarly.
As I said at the outset, because that was one of the questions I asked before coming to this. The persons who are outside, as you say, the hundreds outside in San Fernando, let's deal with that first. Those are persons who are waiting, as I said, on family and friends who are still being processed. Our understanding is it is a similar situation in Tobago. So we were told that there was a gathering of a number of Venezuelans outside and stuff, and that the police may have told them it's time to move along, etc. And they said they were waiting on persons inside. That is my understanding.
Okay, but in Tobago, they had actually developed...
I was just speaking about Tobago.
Right. In Tobago, they had also developed a chit system on their own where they would come off the boat and give themselves number to form some sort of order. Now, our reporters there, it's an informal thing just so that they wouldn't fight among each other. But our reporter is there now, and she's saying it's not just family and friends. Same thing with our reporter in San Fernando, who is fluent in Spanish. She's speaking to people there. They are not just family and friends. They are people who were waiting, and they are being told, take your documents, take your registration form, and go to immigration. In Tobago, our reporter is talking to the police, and they are telling her that they were waiting on instructions from, in one case, the Commissioner of Police, in another case, immigration.
From
Newsday.
All right, as I've just said, and I'll say it again, that is not my understanding of what is taking place. You see this unofficial chit system? One of the news stations on one night during this 2-week period ran a news report of persons with writing and numbers on their arms. I don't know how many of you all saw it. I then had people messaging me, accusing the government of being inhumane and how we could write on people's arms a number for them to enter. That had nothing to do with the official registration process. When I inquired, that was a process that had been developed by Venezuelans. I have also observed on the lines over the past week that have been back, there are a number of persons who may be unscrupulous persons holding themselves out on these lines to be part of a process that they're not. So I am not sure. I've also had in the last couple of days media houses reaching out to me to say interpreters from the Oval have come down to make certain allegations, accusations. None of those persons are official. So I am not sure who's speaking. I'm not saying that what you're saying isn't what is happening. That is not the official information that we have here at this time. And I will not put it past that there's a possibility that persons may be up to mischief in these lines. But we were very specific before coming to this press briefing to inquire in particular with San Fernando, whether those persons, because we were told there are hundreds of persons outside under the tents, etc., whether those persons have been registered or still waiting to be inside registering. They have not been turned away. All of the persons who were there at 5 o'clock that still had to be registered were taken beyond the gates.
Okay. I know you said you wouldn't give the numbers for the actual registration yet, but the website would have given you an idea of how many people filled out those forms. Would you share that number with us, that
The
figure?
use of the website was also a filter process. The online registration system, what it did is it was meant to give you an idea of the numbers that we would face and also that we would tell people when to go. There were certain nights where all of a sudden, now we had security features. You could only register online, and that all that is to turn up there with a filled out form. The registration online was never meant to be the completion of the registration process, as you're aware. On certain nights, all of a sudden, they had spikes of thousands. Again, there is a possibility that those spikes were mischief. Because if, in fact, those registrations online were true, then the numbers that I've quoted of the 15,000 we crossed today, there would still be a lot of people lined up outside these registration centers this evening saying, look, I'm registered and allow me in. Didn't happen. So the online allowed us to see and to weed out a lot of mischief. At the end of the day, the registration process is you had to turn up at a registration center, fill out forms. Those who didn't have forms, we printed forms, we held them fill out, and that's the completion.
Minister, the illegal immigrants that would have been able to register during the amnesty, would they have included those who would have entered during the 2-week period or strictly
Yes.
from before?
Yes.
And they were, and as she mentioned the website, there were reports by some of the Venezuelans that the website was down on Wednesday and they were not able to get forms. Some of them even suggested that the forms were closed off, so they could not get forms.
All
Can
right.
you confirm
Again,
or deny that?
I'll just repeat what I just said. All of that is completely irrelevant, because if you are Venezuelan who turned up and you're in Trinidad and you want to complete the registration process and you couldn't get online for whatever snag they had with the online, you could have gone to one of the centers and you would have been facilitated. From day one, every single center had the ability, and I saw it myself, for persons to go in, be registered there, the forms printed, etc., and they could proceed through the process. So all of that is mischief and completely irrelevant.
Minister, for locals who are providing shelter for some of these migrants who may not have willingly come forward now to be registered, what sort of repercussions could
Sorry,
they
for
face?
locals who are providing homes?
For locals who are providing accommodations for some of these migrants, and these persons have not willingly come forward now to register, what is the process going forward? Can they
You
face-
know of instances of this? If any of you all know of instances of this, I would like to get that information to take to law enforcement, because that sounds highly suspicious. If we've had locals who have been, what did you say, housing Venezuelans and not encouraging them to go forward in a registration process, that sounds like a certain activity. So I would appreciate that information so I could visit those, we could have law enforcement visit those particular people.
Minister, I'm trying to get a better, that's three back, sorry. I'm trying to get a better understanding of the passage between Venezuela and Trinidad for those migrants who may be trying to leave as a result of maybe unsuccessfully or not being able to register for whatever reason. Are we putting things in place to have them go back home legally, or is it that
When you say go back home legally,
a lot of them would have arrived illegally and may not have anything? They may not be able to.
I am sure as part of our removal and deportation process, anyone who wants free passage back to Venezuela will be granted free passage by us back to Venezuela, yes.
But will we be ramping up legal ways to get back to Venezuela? I know we've turned away a lot of illegal boats.
But those are boats trying to come in.
Right.
You want us now to provide for them to go
No,
back?
I'm asking
Okay,
whether.
but I'm trying to understand the circumstance you're referring.
No,
so
no.
persons who are here now who may not have registered and are wholly illegal by our standards, they will be subject to deportation and to removal. You all recall about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago, a Venezuelan plane came in and took about 80-something Venezuelans back to Venezuela. And there was a lot of international, not a lot, a particular international body fussed about it. My understanding and the records and reports show that that was a voluntary exercise. So at the time, we weren't anywhere near to where we are now. There were persons who were in the IDC and they wanted to get home, so arrangements were made to get them home. Those similar arrangements can be made.
At last week's post-cabinet media briefing, the Prime Minister said that he would have instructed you to look at the detention center, the Ghanaians and the Nigerians, to maybe provide a similar provision to that of the Venezuelan. What's the update on that?
As the Prime Minister answered a question on that in Parliament this morning, and I can give you all the numbers, there are only 6 African citizens, throughout the whole IDC. You all would have seen the Prime Minister announce yesterday and tell the President of Ghana, who was here on a visit, that he would be releasing the 1 Ghanaian. I think, if I remember correctly, there are 3 Nigerians, 1 from Gambia, and then 1 from Senegal, and that comprises the 6. I will be coming to Cabinet with a policy as to how we deal with those persons, and also there are others, and it's a minimal amount. Chinese, Cubans, I think Colombians, etc. That is something that the Cabinet will have to look at. Also any CARICOM citizens who are in there as well. So yes, the Prime Minister did direct me, and it is being looked at, and the policy is coming to Cabinet.
Just a two-pronged question as we look ahead to the registration cards being issued. Can you pin down very soon, meaning days, weeks, up to a month? And
Definitely not a month. Days, maybe next couple of weeks at maximum.
And what are people to do in terms of looking for jobs, and recruiters to do in terms of employing people, when all they have is that white piece of paper? Is that enough for employers to go ahead and start enlisting people?
I am certain that regardless of the registration process, employers in Trinidad and Tobago have been employing Venezuelans. What this is meant to do is to prevent them from being exploited and being told, well, you're here illegally, so you know what, work for $5, give me a passport, this is what I'm going to do. Maybe some of those houses you say that holding people and exploiting them. We are turning around the provision and the giving out of these registration cards as quickly as possible to avoid the situation you've just referred to.
The element, though, of the background checks that are still being done before the card is issued, would you advise employers to wait so that the card is essentially a signal that the background check came out clean?
That is completely up to employers. As the Prime Minister said in response to a question this morning, this government doesn't dictate to employers how they go about doing it. Just do things in accordance with the law.
Minister, you mentioned earlier about the protesters and that how they were paid to do what they were supposed to and so on. Could you give us any indication as of now whether there might be any type of further action that could be pending against these individuals for the actions that they've done or said to have done?
The best person to answer that question has to be the Commissioner of Police. That's certainly not under my purview.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, members of the media. I really appreciate your time this evening. This is very important for us to get this information out there. And again, I end by thanking everyone who played a very important role in making this registration process a success. Immigration or Defense Force or Trinidad and Tobago Police Service or Fire Service, all of the volunteers, all of the staff at the Ministry of National Security, the medical officers, the Children's Authority, and everyone else. I'm happy to say that it has been a success. Thank you all very much. Have a pleasant evening.